Hello. Welcome back to Let's Talk Ray Bradbury. If you have not subscribed to our channel, please do. Here on Let's Talk Ray Bradbury, the long-term goal is to review every single short story ever published by Ray Bradbury. Today we are continuing our journey through the Stories of Ray Bradbury collection. We are up to story number 70 of 100 from that volume. Today's story is Some Live Like Lazarus from 1960. The way these reviews work is that I give a brief synopsis of what happens in the story and then follow up with sort of my thoughts on what the whole thing means and whether it's one of the better Bradbury stories. So for that synopsis, it's a first-person account by a woman, Anna Marie, recalling her lifelong romance, and I use romance in quotes, as you'll find out why, with a man named Roger. She first lays eyes on Roger as a little boy at a fancy hotel on some sort of beachside. She slaps him to play tag, as kids often do, and he doesn't respond at all, as his overbearing mother won't allow him to be playing with one of the local girls, and she's very strict about his behavior. Roger comes from a richer family, and his life is very much controlled by his mother. Each year, though, Roger and his family, or his mother at least, come back to the same hotel. Each year, they're a little bit older, and they try to make a connection. Eventually, they sort of become friends, and when they become 20 years old, Roger promises that she will marry him. He will marry her. Excuse me. But that doesn't happen. Age 20 comes and goes, mother won't allow it, and he sort of jokes that she has to die eventually. If she doesn't, I'll kill her, and we're going to get married. And it's said sort of in jest. But age 20 comes and goes, Roger doesn't marry her, but she eventually does marry. She grows up, has a life, and her husband dies, but yet she's still coming back to the same hotel every summer, expecting to see him. Eventually, they are in their 70s, and for one last time, they come to the resort, and finally, Roger's mother dies, according to him. We don't actually see the death to know for sure, and he basically says, "I'm free now. Will you join me? Let's go around. I want to see the world. We've always come back to the same place every summer. I want to see London and Paris and all these different places." And she reluctantly does not go. He touches her hand, completing the game of tag at last. And it's left ambiguous whether he actually did kill her mother. Logic tells me that she probably just died of old age. Maybe he thought he killed her. That's left ambiguous, which I think is a good idea because it leaves you thinking at the end of the story. But nonetheless, limo comes by, picks up Roger, he leaves, and she sort of stays behind and sort of feels like, I don't hate him, despite I've sort of felt like I've hated him because of our lack of sort of love connection over all these years. But it sort of creates a bit of satisfaction, a bit of ending, a bit of closure for them, despite the fact that she sort of knows that they're never meant to be together. So, it's a fun, clever little romance story. It was done as an episode of Ray Bradbury Theater at one point, but I think it would make actually a great sort of modern sort of love story film. So I'm sort of reminded of something like Age of Adeline, or maybe The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, or other stories that take place over many, many decades, although this is not much like either of those. But it sort of has that sort of feel, that sort of long, sweeping, nostalgic story beginning in the late 1800s and going through a large portion of sort of the different golden ages, the roaring 20s and all these different times through the early 20th century that we still sort of romanticize about a little bit. I liked it, but it does bring up some pretty interesting issues, and that's sort of one of the great things about Bradbury's stories. He'll tell you a story that seems silly, but he'll also still manage to give you something to think about. His stories are never sort of just bubblegum. They actually do have enough substance to really keep you thinking long after the story ends. And for me, I think the issue that he brings to mind is this idea of a son's inability to break away from a demanding mother. But is this right or wrong? Is he a victim, or is he doing the right thing by not abandoning her, who seems to be alone, and they seem to be the only thing that each other has? I'm 40 years old. I live in the same house with my divorced mother. And it's a good relationship. But you sometimes wonder, what if I went out and did this? And I have the ability to go out and, marry and live somewhere else, and I can do all of that. But I'm comfortable here, and we're comfortable here, and we provide support for each other, and I think it works. So it's not that his relationship is completely bad. It's bad for Anna Maria, but it can go either way, and I sort of like that about this story. The girl, the woman who spent her life waiting for this guy, she doesn't know what happens in their relationship once they leave the comfort of the resort. By the time the story ends, this is an old lady who they seem like will never die, and he's essentially taking care of her as much as she was caring for him when he was younger. So it sort of brings that full circle. And in our American world, we still have this idea of independence and sort of breaking away and sort of leaving the nest. But I think in a lot of other cultures, as much as I can gather, it's more common for multiple generations of families to live in the same house, and instead of stuffing your elderly parents in a nursing home, you care for them. So I think it definitely has, it brings to mind a little bit of that, as much as simply being a story about a guy who never sort of stands up to his mother and goes off and lives his own life. So that's definitely at play here. But I'm also reminded of other things, like J.R. Tolkien always comes to mind with stories like this for me, because it's not a fantasy story, but a large section of his legendarium involves Numenor. And one of the things about Numenor is that humans were granted longer than usual life. Not immortality, but longer than usual life. And in the beginning, they're content with this. And they will... A king would rule for a few hundred years, and then he would step down while he still had his faculties and allow his son or daughter to become the new ruler in their prime. But as they became corrupted by Morgoth and Sauron, rather, they began to fear death. They would hang on to life even to the last bitter moment, long after they've lost their faculties and their dignity, and they've kept their king, their sons and daughters off the throne in the height of their own power. When they were in their primes of their life, they should have been leading, but no, they were never given that opportunity. And I see this more and more in our world, where our lifespans have grown, and you think of these 80 and 90-year-old billionaires who are still running corporations, and good for them, but they also have children who are sort of under them, who are themselves senior citizens, and that can't be right as far as I can see. So I think this little story about a cute little romance, for me, it calls to mind all of these sort of issues about how do we deal in our society with these long lives. And we see it especially, I would say, one last point, is in the Senate, in Congress. We have these, or even our presidents. We now have presidents who are in their late 70s, even into the early 80s, possibly. And we have people holding Senate seats into their 80s and possibly longer. And good for them. Their experience should not be discounted. It's important. Their knowledge, their wisdom, those are important things. But at the same time, it's not allowing younger people to hold those offices, and younger people can be more in tune with the modern world and what current and younger generations need from their leaders. So all of this comes to mind for me for this fun little story called Some Live Like Lazarus from 1960 from Ray Bradbury. Thank you for watching. Next time we'll be discussing The Best of All Possible Worlds from 1960. I hope you will tune in and join me for that. See you soon.